Nice to meet you. My name is John Hovell, and I couldn't get this new HDMI connector to work, so I'm just going to talk, if that's all right. Maybe no slides is a good thing. These things happen for a reason. So the topic in this room, just to make sure you're in the right room, is future of KM, future of knowledge management. And my intent is to bring a bit of humor to it, and ideally a bit of inspiration. And to me, when you think of the future of any topic, you're pretty much incorrect and doubtful and just flat out wrong with anything you try to predict. So I stand in front of you wrong and incorrect. Other than that, we can start. Yeah, exactly. So I'm aware of it. Had I had pictures or a way to show this to you, I talked to a friend of mine. You may recognize the name, Chris Collison, who's based in England, who does quite a bit of knowledge management work. He did a very similar talk, Future of Knowledge Management, about a year ago at the Henley Business School in England. So I reached out for him and said, do you mind? I really liked your presentation. Do you mind if I use your template and some of your content? And he said, absolutely. And we even had a good phone call and brainstormed a bit yesterday. So maybe that's another reason the slides aren't working, because they're half mine and half his, and kind of created on the fly. What he dug up, so not me, but him, were two old slides that I'll just kind of read to you a bit. One is from the DC area, the KM World Conference agenda from 2001. So 17 years ago. They had 5 different tracks. They had KM strategies, KM tools and technology, KM content management, culture, and e-business. Those were the 5 categories, 5 tracks in KM World 17 years ago. And the idea is, why don't we flip back 17 years, watch some progression, and then ideally sort of flip forward maybe 17 years. That's the other big thing in the future of. Future for some people is 5 minutes from now, 5 hours from now, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years, 5 decades. When we say the future of, we probably need a little bit more clarity in what kind of time frame if we're talking about future. So if I use 17 years ago, we were talking about second generation KM. Here's a funny one. The case study that happened at 11:15 a.m. was from iOmega. Do you remember iOmega? They were the zip drive, right? Which I'm pretty sure is long gone. So they did a KM case study 17 years ago. What else was in here? Communities of practice, ROI of knowledge management, smart e-business. Let's see, the new KM. So we've been talking about future of KM and what is KM really since the beginning. The next chart that he dug up was, you've seen the hype circle before? So where you start with some kind of trigger, everyone gets excited and there's all this energy, and then reality kicks in and it's not quite as good as you wanted, but then over time it kind of plateaus out. We had, on this chart from 2003, Gartner's hype circle for knowledge management, with little bullets along the way of what was exciting, what was coming, what was not quite there yet. So, to give you some of that language from, 14 years ago, we had, at the very beginning, so still new and exciting, corporate blogging, information quality, idea management, and virtual communities were the first 4 bullets 17 years ago. That's going to save the world, that's brand new, very exciting. So fast forward to today, and how have those played out? Now if you go up the curve, at the top, so at the height of excitement, 14 years ago, taxonomy, expertise location, real-time collaboration, and records management. That was at the top of the curve 14 years ago. Now, the things we were already upset with, we were down, we were in the trough of disillusionment, they weren't really all they were sold for us to be. Automated text categorization, e-learning, and team collaboration support. That's what we were upset with 14 years ago, or slightly disappointed by 14 years ago. Now, 14 years ago, what had sort of plateaued and was doing well, best practices, document management, and this was interesting. The very last one is packaged methodologies, which I'm not even quite sure exactly what that might be, because I can't think of a packaged KM methodology. Must have been some other packaged methodology. So Chris went to the SIKM group. So if you're not familiar with SIKM, it stands for Systems Integrators Knowledge Management. Stan Garfield, Sanjay Swarup, and a few others in the Midwest started the SIKM group. As far as I know, it is the longest standing knowledge management community of practice. To this day, they still have a monthly phone call. It also shows its age because it's run, the technology side, the online side, is done through a Yahoo group. So if that gives you an idea, it's been around for a little while. They just had their monthly phone call, I think, 2 days ago. I believe it's the third Tuesday of every month. So yeah, it would have been, I think, 2 days ago. So Chris reached out to that group and said, let's look at 15 years of knowledge management. So there's thousands of people in this group, all very professional, experienced KM people. To that group, what do you say has happened in KM over 15 years? They had about 7 or 8 things. His exact question was, what's been important in KM's evolution over the last 15 years? Answers were connecting people to content, communities of practice, just connecting people without content, social media, personal knowledge management, learning culture, collaboration, knowledge assets, and sharing. Those have been the most impactful contributions of KM over 15 years. So you've probably heard this quote before. William Gibson gets credit for saying, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So this is where I want to take a shift from, there's already pieces of things happening today that are going well, or are not well known, or are not going well, that are about to become more impactful and stick, come together and become more broad. That's what I want to share for another 5 or 10 minutes. And then what I'd like to do is have us form small groups, and we'll chat in a small group about what your view of the future of KM is, and then we'll open it up to the room, and we'll have everybody discuss. My thinking is, let's practice KM while we're here in the room, and also I'm thinking I'm sort of just one person with sharing a few perspectives. I'd love to hear why you chose this room and what's important to you about this topic, and what would be your guidance of what the future of KM might look like. 2 years ago, APQC, so if you're not familiar with APQC, the American Productivity and Quality Center, they almost annually, but they miss a few years, they'll go out to their 300 or 400 paying members of their knowledge management research, and they'll ask, what are the most important or the most impactful topics today? And that tends to be what they use. They have a great annual conference that they run, usually in Houston. So I've got from 2 years ago, their top 10 from their 400 organizational size members. So as opposed to SIKM, here's what APQC said. In order, the most popular KM topic or question 2 years ago was knowledge retention and knowledge transfer, which if you were in this room a minute ago, I think Zach spent a few minutes talking about that one too. Content management, KM strategy and business case, measuring health, impact, return on investment, governance, communities of practice, then technology, then change management, information security, and knowledge mapping. Knowledge mapping was new. In 2012, I looked back over their history. It first entered the APQC conference and writings during 2012, and it just made it to this top 10 or top 12 list in 2015. So knowledge mapping has a bit of a trend coming along with it. So that's APQC's view. I've got, having spoken to Chris Collison, I've got his view of the future of KM. I've got Douglas Widener as the founder of KMI, talked to him, got his view, which he's about to publish in a book. So this is sort of an inside scoop of his view. And then I talked to Stan Garfield, who leads that SIKM group, and got his view of the future of KM. So I will just offer a few of these to see what sticks, and you'll also kind of see the difference people have on their own view of where KM might be going. So Chris Collison first. Chris says, so what Chris does is he's a consultant, and he goes into relatively large organizations and does quite a bit of knowledge management strategy work. That tends to be the work he does. So he's inside organizations doing KM. 4 or 5 themes and patterns that he's seen that he predicts to really take hold. One, a shift from centralized knowledge management to embedding KM within a business partner role. So much less of a KM department and more of almost everyone doing KM, or at least some role being skilled in knowledge management. He's already seeing that and predicts more of it. KM and learning converging. So not only KM and the learning function converging, but just the whole, the field of knowledge management and the field of learning and development, performance management, leadership development, those fields sharing their tools and techniques and approaches. KM embracing technology advancement. So maybe as opposed to, and I think, again, we heard Zach do the SharePoint jokes that we often hear. Maybe it's less separatist between knowledge management and information management. Maybe there's an opportunity to truly get along and partner, and the old talk about people, process, technology, actually having that full partnership with technology. KM driving social business. So if business is moving more social, more flat, more open, more collaborative, KM could be driving some of that, in Chris's view, and increasingly balancing strategic vision with operational delivery. So I think you'll find, at least I've found, there are the KM strategic thinkers and the KM implementers, and almost never the two shall meet. So blending both, the strategic planning and thinking of what are we doing and what's the purpose of KM, and the actual implementation of real KM projects. That's Chris's view. Compare that to Douglas's view, about to be published. He's got more succinct phrases, and 6 of them. One is increased performance support, creation of KM methodologies, and this is one of his big ones. He talks about this one. His view is that KM to this day does not have, we mostly would agree that KM has a different definition in every organization, every place you sort of implement and practice KM. It is a little bit different everywhere. But sort of beneath the definition, what's the methodology? What's the way of practicing, the way of doing KM? Douglas's view is that all these different ways of doing it will come together into a more coherent, more widely accepted methodology, or 2 or 3. But his view is ideally a KM methodology, a way of doing KM. I personally would push against it a little bit. I'm not sure there is a single way. I think it might be more of still staying open to not only multiple definitions of KM, but multiple ways of implementing KM. He is a big fan of maturity models. So he believes in evidence-based KM maturity models becoming more widely known, more widely accepted. There will be a almost predefined way of measuring the success of KM. I have a feeling APQC would tend to agree. I think APQC also goes the evidence-based maturity route. Defined competency areas. What is it that KM practitioners and professionals are skilled at and good at? An actual definition of competency areas. And human capital versus technology focus. So there's a bit of a pattern between him and Chris. He actually would almost go the opposite way of Chris and say even more focus on people and culture and behaviors. I don't know that he would say push away from technology, but even more focus on the human capital, the human side of KM. So then Stan, and Stan in his funny, very informal way, just has 4 off-the-cuff thoughts that he wanted to share. One is, because you notice in the title of this, it's Future of KM, Dead or Alive, or the way Eric spelled it, Dead of Alive, if you notice that. Stan said, saying, and he's got this published all over too, saying KM is dead is like saying email is dead. We might like to, and we might sort of hope and somewhat think it is, but it is just there. So saying KM is dead is like saying email is dead. Some people and organizations are tired of KM. That's Stan's view of the future of KM. Some organizations are just tired. I think we heard Zach say it this morning too. The need and the opportunity is persistent. Fairly wide open, fairly broad. The need and the opportunity is persistent for knowledge management, however you interpret that. And his very last one, what we call KM is not as important as how we do KM, which I thought was interesting. What we call it is not as important as what we do it, as how we do it. Stan's view. And you might notice in the overview, the paragraph that was written about this particular topic, ISO, the International Standards Organization, is in the progress right now of launching a new international standard, the first ever international standard. So there's one in Israel, there's one in Australia, and there's one in the UK, British, standard for knowledge management. This is the first ever international standard. And on the SIKM group, plus some other small networks, there's quite a bit of conflict and debate about whether there even should be a standard, let alone what should go in the standard. So on the slide, what I threw in, it was open. So the timing of this event is slightly unfortunate by literally 2 days, I think 48 hours. We had about 2 or 3 months to publicly comment. There's an open, ISO has a process for launching new standards, and part of it is the public response phase. It just closed on the 16th. So 2 days ago, everyone in the world had open access to go onto the ISO site. You had to register, which upset some people. That already felt like it wasn't open for some people. But you had to register for free, go in and read the policy, the regulation, and add your comments to it. So now they're going through the phase of reviewing those comments. In case you haven't seen it yet, the 11 areas of that standard, there's an introduction to KM, which already upsets quite a few KM people. The definition itself, right at the beginning of the entire standard, doesn't say knowledge management standard, it says knowledge management systems standard. And just that systems word throws some people off. And when you read through it, they will, and I'll read you, they do talk about the people side, but it is quite a systems and IT systems policy, which is interesting, right? Introduction, scope, normative references, it's quite a policy. Terms and definitions, so we're 4 categories in and we haven't even said anything yet. 5, context of the organization, which was nice. They are talking about the different organizations do it differently. That is in the standard. Leadership, so there's the people side. Planning, support, operation, there's the implementation. Performance evaluation is section 10, which is interesting. Performance evaluation as part of KM or as part of a KM standard, questionable. And then improvement, which is about improving KM and improving the organization, are both right within the standard. So I wanted to make sure you were aware of that.
Performance evaluation comment related to individual employees' performance evaluation or performance evaluation?
Both. It's actually all 3. Individual, group, and organization. They're all in the policy. It's actually relatively detailed. I was surprised how much detail is in there. So then the last one I've got before, well, maybe a couple of thoughts here, is my own perspective. So I have my notes here, but I might just talk to these. For me, yeah, I'm not even going to read it. For me, I've got more and more into the field of organization development. So we know that knowledge management and information management have been blurred and confused and trying to partner, and culture, people, process, technology, managing of knowledge, flow of knowledge, managing of information, flow of information. Tacit knowledge, explicit knowledge, all that in that KM bucket. I purposefully, so in this area, George Mason, as a university, offers a master's degree in KM-OD. They pull together those 2 separate fields. I personally had pushed away from the OD side of the house because my personal experience had been that OD was about org design. It was about restructuring organizations. And my experience had been, during a restructure, I never survived. It was always, I was out of a job and I was on to the next thing. So I personally did not have much favor for OD work. It turns out that poor org design is a lot like information management when you talk about org development. OD gets confused with OD. Org development is different from org design. Org development is about boldly revealing to a system what the system is. Or if there's conflict or tension in a system, working through that tension as opposed to avoiding and hiding it, or simply mentioning we are avoiding conflict. That's the dynamic of this room. To me, that kind of skill set, that kind of seeing how a group works and offering to the group how they're working, as opposed to coming in with KM solutions, as opposed to, hey, I see us as a very extroverted company. We have extroverted preferences. We should do communities of practice. It's going to work well here. I see us as an introverted preference kind of organization. We should do expertise location. That's what's going to work well. It's a very KM expert mode. OD comes in a listening mode. Here's what I notice about this system. Do you notice this as well? What's the impact? And what is your part? How are you colluding, would be the OD language, with the system? What is your part of that? I mentioned the whole OD field because I think George Mason has been way ahead of the curve. I think the merging of these fields and us, KM expanding its skill set into OD and vice versa. OD expanding its skill set into KM and having collaborative techniques and approaches and methodologies, if such a thing comes true, those two are extremely impactful for an organization and teams and individuals together. And I think I will pause there and turn it over to small groups for us to chat about it that way. The question for you to discuss in your small group is, what is your view? What do you think the future of knowledge management is? And if it's helpful, if this doesn't cause confusion for you, the lenses you could use are the one we just talked about, individual versus group or project team versus organization. Think about the future of those. Or think about people, process, technology. What's the future of culture, the future of people, the future of KM process, the future of KM technology? If either one of those sort of three-part lenses helps you in your small group, talk about that. So timing-wise, I think 9:40 to 10:05, and I think we end at 10:30. Is that correct? So we've got 25 minutes. Let's do 15. Yeah, let's do 15 minutes. So a pretty decent amount of time in a small group. I'm aiming for groups of 3 or 4. So relatively small groups. If you have to move your chairs, that's fine. But let's go 10:05 to 10:20, and I'll give you a 2-minute warning before 10:20. Small groups, wide open. What is your view? What is the future of knowledge management? All right, so if you wrap up your last thought, we'll come back as a group. All right, so if I can bring everybody back. I was lucky enough to, just having been patient and trying again, I have slides now, so magic, I can show you. What I couldn't describe, and I left out for you that now I can actually show you, is if we were going to do 17 years ago to today to 17 years from now, I don't have a picture of my family and I 17 years from now, but this is my wife and I 17 years ago, before I even knew of KM. So I started practicing professional KM. I think I was doing KM, but I didn't call it KM until 2003. And this is my wife and I in 2001. We had just gotten married, and we had just gotten our first dog, who passed away about a year ago. So this is 17 years ago. And then there's the brochure for KM World, just to give you a visual of what that looked like. There's that hype curve I already mentioned. But what I want to skip ahead to is show you how quickly things change. This is 2 weeks ago. So there's more people now and less dogs. We've been through 3 dogs in 17 years. So this was us New Year's Eve, and I think that was like the day after, one of those the light snowstorms we had. So Camden and Michelle, 13 and 6 in 17 years. So that's my personal side of we're changing every day, it's coming together. What might KM look like? A lot different, I'm not sure. Here were those. So I'll leave this up as some patterns and some themes that seem to be holding true for long periods of time. So I'll put that up there, but what I want to do for the last 5-10 minutes here is just open it up to the room. What did you talk about in your discussion? What have you learned this morning, today? what is your view that you'd like to share with the room about the future of KM? And someone over here is being encouraged to share.
So I guess I've just been elected.
I think you have.
Maybe I took notes. We had not totally different, but very different perspectives, if you will. But there's some common themes. I mean, we went everywhere from yes, it is dead to it's in its infancy to it needs to be resuscitated, and we used a bunch of analogies. I like the cultural aspect, the overarching cultural and organizational aspect. We had some focus on more on the individual. So I guess the combination of the go back to the question that using the lens, the combination, some combination of lens or one of those singularities. Teaching KM as a system like all others, the equivalency in the C-suite with regards to business and finance and some of those things, and having it raised to that level. In some cases it has, but the future would be better and brighter if it would be that way consistently across the board. Understanding that there was a training and an educational aspect at the individual level to understand what KM was, so maybe a broader, and these are my words, a broader application of understanding and putting that in the individual's toolbox of what KM is. If I missed something, please let me help me out. I think that's pretty much covers a large. We had a very there were 5 of us, and we each had a very different perspective.
Thank you. Well, we had 4 main points in our group here. The first point was KM enables doing more with less, and that's something that's, if you're working around the federal government, you've heard this for, 17 plus years. You're always doing more with less, especially in periods of drawdown, and KM kind of helps enable that. You're able to organize your information faster, find it faster, so findability and organization are 2 key points there. KM's enabling sharing through more social interactions. We think that is kind of here now, but it's growing, we think, along with, you got Facebook and all kinds of other sharing portals. SharePoint is a good one for work, but we think that the social interactions is really getting at the tacit information people have. Also, KM being incentivized with awards and standards. I just learned there's a Baldrige Award that I've never heard of before, but there's definitely an incentive to help foster KM in organizations, those kinds of quality awards. And the other one I had was, this is something I brought up at the very end of our conversation, and I think you might have mentioned it or tipped me off on it, KM at the individual level. KM being all powerful, all knowledgeable, where is the stuff? The people at the end of the trail, like Zach said, have the information. And I think my personal view, I think my group would probably agree that at the individual level where the knowledge resides, they're kind of sharing it along with those social interactions. So I think the KM organization will probably shrink a bit, but it'll be pushed down to the lowest levels.
Thank you.
So we talked a lot about technology. I guess this was sort of part of what you were addressing. The 3 of us talked a lot about technology, and sort of we ended up talking about generationally how that looks, because Zach mentioned, baby boomers are retiring, and then you've got, Gen Xers who started growing up with some technology, millennials who are growing up with more technology, and then all these kids, later from the, born in the 2000s who are just growing up with smartphones, in their face. And we talked about also, emotional intelligence, and you mentioned that, the face-to-face interactions. And so we think there will be a lot of interesting impacts because of how different generations are growing up with technology and how they'll utilize those tools. And so we didn't really reach a firm answer, but we did talk a lot about that, because I don't think there is a firm answer. I mean, we can always speculate, but each generation who comes through the workforce is going to do it a little bit differently, I think. And it's going to look a little bit different because of their experiences.
Thank you. One more?
So we talked about, I think we started with this conversation that Mitch had brought up during the last talk about, what is knowledge management versus information management versus content management. And I think we kind of came to the conclusion that it's really essential to honestly not get too bogged down in the terminology, but think about what matters to your organization, what matters to your end users, what matters to your team, and tweak that language and shifting it in a way that it showcases that business value. Like, okay, we need content management. What is that actually going to do for me as an end user? What is that going to help me accomplish? But I think another thread we had there was running into these cycles where, I think as we talked about in the last talk, KM programs are often the first ones to have their budgets cut. And then you have to go through that whole uphill battle again to share that value and share why it matters and gain that buy-in again. So I think the takeaway we came to, and everyone added if I missed anything, but I think the key takeaway there is we need to be constantly cognizant of who our end users are and what business values they're looking for. Otherwise, we're going to keep going through this cycle over and over again as KM practitioners.
I want to add, it's probably too small to see up there. I guess I'll go this way. Thank you. Conversational leadership. That's just one more phrase I want to pop out there. And I do tend to agree that it's about the value and listening to a need and supporting that need, whether it's KM or something else. But to me, as I watch the patterns, and if the future's already here, but it's just all over the place, I think whatever this phrase conversational leadership is, it's just now beginning to be talked about and published, and I personally feel real potential in that labeling of KM and OD and IM and learning and leadership and design thinking and diversity and inclusion and all these sort of hot growing topics, this new thinking of what leadership is and how to do it. Conversational leadership, to me, has real potential. Nope, it's too new. No, too new. Yes, I can make up something.
Where did it come from?
Two places. So Juanita Brown and David Isaacs, who are the creators of the World Cafe approach. If you go to conversationalleadership.com, just type that in, they've bought it, and it redirects you to worldcafe.net. So it takes you to the World Cafe approach, and they sort of believe almost what we just did, but in a more cafe, rotational, predefined topic approach. They believe that's conversational leadership. David Gertine, as the most influential KM person in Europe, definitely in the UK, is writing a book. So a blog meets a book together, and he's calling it conversational leadership. And I think he's bought conversational-leadership.com or .net. And when you go to that, it goes to his book. And of course, he wants people to comment and share and build it together. For me, what I've picked up on their two sides of it, the two, just like knowledge management, and knowledge is loaded, management is loaded, and together it means something slightly different. Conversational leadership. Conversation in the OD space is about dialogue. It's about two-way, as opposed to one-way, dictatorial, authoritarian, I'll tell you. It's true conversation. With even deeper than that, one of the most powerful questions there is, are we having the conversation we need to be having right now? It's a really pressing, difficult conversation, and most of the time you're not, is what's underneath that. Conversation. Leadership is everything we have been talking about in leadership for a few decades now. Same idea. It's conversational. It's two-way. It's I have thoughts, you have thoughts. I'm a leader today, you're a leader tomorrow. It's less about role and more about what's the task and emotion and energy of the group. Future view of leadership. So now you put the two together, conversational leadership. That is interesting. There's new ways of having better, deeper, more impactful conversations. There's new ways of leading groups and teams and people. What is that together? So I offer that as sort of a close and another personal, where it might go, something to watch for. And as I said right up front, to take us full circle, I'm probably wrong. So there you go. I think that takes us to time. So thank you for coming. Have a good day.